Confessions. We're obsessed with them. They're everywhere. On TV, in magazines, in the immediate world around us, they get our attention every time. Why? Because for a moment, we forget that we have our own confessions that need to be uncovered. But what happens when it's our turn? When it's our turn to say the things that make our hands shake and our hearts race? For many of us, maybe all of us, fear is so often what stops us from saying the things we so desperately want to say. Fear of what people think, fear of where it might land us, fear of being the only one. This book is my confession. It's the good, the bad, and the ugly lessons I've learned about finding God and myself, all the while growing up as a senior pastor's kid. It's real and it's honest. And maybe there'll be a moment where you can nod your head and say, "Me too." Because you're not alone. You and I, we're not that different. We've both been hurt. We've both asked, what if? We've both had nights where our smile was all too fake. We've both wondered if anyone actually knows us. We've both felt like our lives were meant to be significant. And my prayer is this book, Confessions of a Church Kid, will show you just how freeing it is to admit the things you feel like you can't. And here's the deal. I'll go first.
Today I am absolutely privileged to have Elyse Murphy on the show with me. You're 26, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
26-year-old author. She just launched her first book, Confessions of a Church Kid. She moved from Australia to California on her own, and she's now a pastor on staff at Oasis LA under lead pastors Philip and Holly Wagner. Thank you so much for joining me today, Elyse.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I love this stuff.
Yeah, super. So first of all, I just want to ask you a little bit about your background. Like, how did you grow up? Tell me about your parents. I know they were in ministry. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I grew up in Sydney, Australia, hence the accent, which is apparently curving a little now, which I'm happy with, but
okay,
that's fine.
Okay.
Grew up in Sydney with them, and we started at Hillsong Church. Mum jokes that she was like having labor contractions while we were in a Hillsong service with me. So I literally was born in church.
Wow.
And we were there until I was about 7 years old, and then moved to the south part of Sydney to take on a church there. And that was called Shy Alive. And we were there for 18 years. And so grew up in church as a church kid, pastor's kid, everything kid. And came out of school, went straight into Bible college, then came straight onto staff with my dad, and kind of grew up navigating life while leading people. Was in church, leading people and how to do life while I was still trying to figure out life. Still am trying to figure out life, just away. But yeah, so did that, worked for my parents for 6 years, and then really felt it was time to transition to something new. Always felt like God had called me to America for some stage, and when I was little I used to think everybody loved America as much as me, which is apparently not true. So but really submitted that to my dad, and was like, when you feel the time's right, you let me know. Which sounds really like submissive and spiritual, but actually I just didn't want the pressure of like being like, when's the time? My dad came to me one day and was like, all right, I feel like the time's right. And Pastor Philip and Holly had approached me and said, we'd love for you to come on team for a while and just figure out what that might look like. So moved over here about 1.5 years ago, and it's been crazy, but the best.
That's awesome. So what about your experience growing up as a pastor's kid inspired you to write this book?
Yeah. I have a lot of stories, more than the average, more than I'm willing to share than the average, probably. Okay. And I guess my personality growing up is I've never been very good at keeping secrets or just like keeping things to myself. I was always the child without a filter, and my dad would have to be like, stop. Yeah. Always overshare, too much information. Like, that's the story of my life. So growing up, I guess I just was always very inquisitive. I knew I loved Jesus, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't losing the fun in life. And so that got me into some interesting situations which are in my book. But I think as I started preaching as a young girl, I would always share stories from my own life. And I guess I didn't really realize how much my honesty unlocked freedom in other people, to be honest, if that
Wow.
makes sense.
Totally.
And so for me, as I was preaching and I would meet teenagers afterwards and students and young adults, all ages, would come up to me and say, oh my gosh, your story is my story, whether it was me talking about night terrors or relationship breakups or church hurts or whatever it was. It seemed that my honesty unlocked honesty in other people and brought freedom. And so not only was it freeing for me to be able to share, but it was helping other people. And so one day I was having a conversation with my dad, and he's like, Elyse, I think you need to do something with this. And so it really just came out, the book came out of a heart to be really honest and hope that my honesty would allow other people the freedom or the permission that we sometimes feel we don't have to be really honest and take the mask down. And so I figured, well, if someone has to go first, I'll go first. So that's kind of where it started.
Wow. That's awesome. So you mentioned this with your parents, of course, being pastors in light of your book. And how have you dealt with the hurts that come from being a pastor's kid in ministry? Like, you see everything. You see your parents and their highs and lows, and you see the effects that church people have on your parents, who are your pastors, but also very near and dear to you. So how did you, or how do you continually work through those hurts in ministry?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a journey. And again, I forget how to not be honest. So I still work through things, and there are still things that come up that I'm like, oh my gosh, that was a reminder of what happened 5 years ago. Ugh, Jesus, help me.
Yeah.
I think growing up, it is tough. And that's the first thing, is to actually acknowledge the fact that growing up and seeing every area of church life, that's a big thing. And I think Jesus definitely graces us for that.
Yeah.
There's still the human aspect of seeing your parents go through things, and my parents loved me as perfectly as humanly possible. So my relationship with them is amazing. And so first of all, I was always very protective of them because I loved them so much and because I loved the church. And I saw how much, I guess, pastors' kids and church kids see all the work that goes on behind the scenes. They see the prayer, they see the blood, sweat, and tears type thing. And so when they see other people trying to manipulate that or bring division, you take it very personally.
Totally.
And so that was always something I really had to work through. And I think for me, a breakthrough moment I had was the day I realized that we're all just human. And I know that sounds very simple, but I think the reality that I had of the fact that I'm human and I'm flawed. And so the mistakes I make that I really hope people have grace for is the same kind of grace I need to extend for other people, because people are just trying to do the best they can. And there's such a cliche but very true statement: hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
And we're all a little bit hurt, and so we're all going to hurt someone a little bit.
Sure.
And so I think the reality of it is whether people see pastors as a safer place to hurt or whatever it is, I'll never really fully understand. But I think the release I had in understanding that I'm imperfect and the church is not going to be perfect until Jesus comes back. His bride is not, because we're trying to do the best we can in a broken world with broken hearts and broken experiences. But I think if we can understand that through the brokenness, there is beauty in ashes, and there is grace for when people hurt us and they didn't mean it, and always taking it with a bit of grace, I think, is always the best way to do things. And so I'm still learning that. It's still a journey for me, but I think that kind of way to look at it has helped me. That's
awesome. So for you, Elyse, when did you have that breakthrough moment as far as your personal relationship with God? I've personally been growing up in church too. I'm not a pastor's kid, but I've been in church all my life. And when you're growing up in church, you see, am I going to serve God because my parents are serving God? Or am I going to do church because my parents are? And this is just what we do? Or when did it for you become so real that it became, this is my faith because I want a relationship with God, not because my parents have one?
Yeah, I think honestly, Erin, it wasn't one moment, and I can't pinpoint. Some people have those moments where it's like, it's that moment and that was it. That didn't happen for me. For me, it was conversations and altar call moments and more altar call moments and more ministry moments. So I was like, okay.
Yes.
Bring me in.
Yeah.
And it was summer camps where I just would experience the presence of God and know He was real. And then I remember a conversation with a friend at school when I was about 16 years old, and she wasn't a Christian. And I remember we were sitting on the driveway, whatever, I don't know if America calls it the same thing, but like at school, that was like our lunch spot, and we were talking, and we were sitting on our school bags. I remember it so clearly. And she said, how do you go with coming to a party on Friday night and then being at church on Sunday? And I was like, I think that's a decision I have to start to make. And I remember like processing with her the understanding that I can't live two separate lives, and I didn't want to, but I didn't know which one to choose. And I think it was just and I've always processed things through talking. And so I just wanted that process and that journey of like, I need to choose one. I can't, the Bible says a double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. And so while we have two choices, plan A and plan B, we'll never be both feet in one. And so I remember going through that journey, and then having another time on Good Friday, it was at a youth service, and putting my hand up, and I was like the pastor's kid. I think I was like 17. It was around the same time, actually, putting my hand up and going down the front and rededicating my life to Jesus, because I think I'd always been a Christian, maybe. I don't really know. I don't know, maybe. Special case for PKs. But rededicating my life and walking down in front of all of my friends and all of my youth ministry, and being so nervous and so scared of what people would think, but just knowing this is the right thing. And then another time, and another summer camp, and feeling the presence of God talk to me, and someone prophesying over me. And so there was moments along the way, I think. And honestly, it's a continual thing. Sometimes I'm continually like, Jesus, am I even saved right now? I know am I Christian? Like, we one moment, but definitely many along the way where I was like, okay, God's taking me through this level of it, or He's taking me deeper or broader, or showing me a new side of Himself. So I think it's just always been a journey for me.
That's good. Your answers are intriguing me to really, really want to get the book and read it, So I appreciate your answers. The next question I want to ask you, just about the practical side of writing a book. There are probably people watching and listening that want to know, I have this desire to write a story about my life, but after I write it, like, what do I do? How do I even start? Do you have any tips or steps? What are the top 3 things that you would suggest?
Yeah. First of all, talk to my dad, because I'm the worst author ever. Like, I'm such an accidental author. It's insane.
Really?
Like, I really am the girl that doesn't like to read. Like, I prefer to, write text speak, instead of, write full words. And so somehow I became a writer. It's an accident. Jesus graced me for it. Wow. Because I look back sometimes and I'm like, wow, I read it, and I'm like, honestly, as bad as it sounds, I read it, and I'm like, oh, that's good. I'm like, I didn't come up with that, but, I need to reread that. So pretty sure I just wrote the book for me, for when I need to open it up again.
Yeah.
For me, again, it was, the reality is it was an accidental book.
Wow.
Remember, it started as, came out of preaching, really, and I would always know I had an illustration or a story to back up a point, or a scripture or something. I could just never... I would sometimes forget it. I would be like, there's a story about this somewhere. And so one day my dad encouraged me to write down all the stories from my life growing up in church that made me glad, that made me mad, and made me sad. Glad and sad. So I just wrote an inventory of them, not stories, just an inventory of them. This one time, that one time, like Friends episodes. The one time when. So did that, and started writing the headlines to the stories, and the headlines became paragraphs that had descriptive words in them, that had conversations in them. And I was like, oh, I don't think I was meant to write in this in depth. And my dad started reading them one day and was like, Elyse, you're a writer. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm a talker. I don't write. And literally the next day I woke up and my dad had written down my outline for my book. My dad's incredible. And he was like, all right, here's your book. You need to write it.
Wow.
I'm taking 2 weeks off from work and you're writing it. And I was like, okay. I just kind of happened.
Wow.
And so from there, so I think one thing I would say would be start writing. People always say, I want to write a book one day. Okay, start writing. You don't know where it's going to end up. Start in the middle. Start at the end of the book. Start at the front of the book. Start where you don't know. And I remember the first thing I wrote when I really decided to do it was, the first thing was I'm sitting at my computer, thinking about what I'm going to eat for lunch, but I guess I'll write a book. And that was my first line. It never even ended up in the book.
Wow.
And it took me through the process of why am I writing this book? What will it say? Who do I want it to help? And then straight after I wrote that, it was like a 1-page thing. I ended up writing the very first story in the book, and that ended up being in the book. And so I would say start now. Just start somewhere and see what happens, and put a reminder on your calendar every day to write for half an hour or an hour or whatever your schedule lets you do. If it's more creative in the morning, I find I'm not a morning person at all.
Yeah.
But I am more creative in the morning. So sometimes I will just do it in the morning or get it off my mind, or I'll be on a plane, and that's what I find really helpful because there's no distractions. So start writing, and then bounce it off people as well. Someone you trust. One of my best friends, Nicole Reyes, Nicole, we'll bounce our writing off each other. And she's an amazing writer as well. And so she's someone I trust, and vulnerable things. She'll tell me to be more vulnerable, or sometimes she'll be like, okay, a little too much, like calm down. So she's a great sounding board for that. And I think that's important as well. And find some writers you like as well, but don't try and find your own voice. And so I think one of the cool things, probably the most common piece of feedback I've had is that when people read what I write, they say it's like I was talking to them, which I love. It's like, okay, well, I never learned how to write. I just kind of did it. Yeah. And so I think we say all these like 10 steps on how to be a writer, and it's like, there's just one, just write. And you're a writer. And so I think you don't need permission. You don't need, and just write and see what happens, and pray about it. It's a spiritual thing. Yes. And so I had a producer. What am I saying? I live in LA now. A publisher. Yeah. That contacted me and found out, I guess it was a niche area, being church kids and stuff like that, would love to read it, and let them read it. And my dad had told them the book was finished. Thanks, Dad. Like I'd written like half of it. That's it. My dad is amazing.
Greatest supporter.
Right, absolutely. He's like, she's done it. I was like, Dad, like, how did you through it?
Come on, Dad. Seriously.
He's like, I finish it now. I was like, thanks, Dad. So he wanted to read it, and it kind of went from there. And there was a process of developing and editing for a few years. But so I'd say find someone to read your stuff, and then put it out there. You never know what'll happen. Yeah. So
very good, very good. So would you say that your dad was the primary one who helped you from start to finish, or do you have a recommendation of people that are wanting to figure out, how do I market my book? Like once it's done, what do I do with it? Because for me, watching you, Instagram, awesome. Your Facebook, awesome. I love the pictures and the quotes, and there was this momentum as an observer who lives in a different state. Just seeing you launch your book and the promo and the website and just everything put together. Like, who helped you with that? Or what do you recommend for people that want to do something like that?
Totally. Yeah, I think my dad was, there was like different levels of people that helped me from start to finish. My mum and my dad were definitely my biggest cheerleaders the entire time. Yeah. I had friends from Sydney, and then when I moved to LA, and people that didn't let me give up on it, because there were so many times where I was just trying to figure out my own life, and I was not even thinking about my book. Like in the last 12 months even, I was like, I didn't even think, I was like, I've got enough going on in my own life. Like, this is crazy. But you kind of have that. And so I think when you understand that's what a lead up to a launch of a book is, just a little insane for a while. And I'm still coming down from it a little bit, but it's like, it just gets a little insane. And so everyone in their life has those kind of times. But Daryl and Ali Vesterfelt are one of the reasons my book is out. They were my book developers. And so we spent a week together in Minnesota a couple of years ago and went through the very early stages of my book. That's when I was like, had no grammar, and there was such raw stories. And Ali was like, okay, let's figure out what we want this book to say. And they helped me craft raw emotion and put it in a way that it could connect with an audience.
Got it.
I'm so grateful for them, and they work with some of the best people. And Ali has a book, Packing Light, which is phenomenal for every young adult. I would tell everybody to read it, and she's amazing. They really helped that process. And then my publishers in terms of editing and stuff were great too. And one thing I would say to authors and writers at that stage is don't be afraid to fight for your own voice. And my publishers were amazing with that. Salubris publishers, and from My Healthy Church, where they're with AOG, they're amazing, and they really allowed me to have my own voice, and we had a lot of conversations on it. But just fight for your own voice, because it's your book and you get one shot at it. And so for me, I took a lot of the social media and the marketing and promo side of things on myself, just because I knew what I wanted it to look like and feel. And even the cover of the book, I was I love my publishers because I got a lot of say in that and what I wanted it to look like,
Sure.
and just wanted to represent me, you know?
Yeah.
You get one shot at a first book, I guess. And
Yeah.
so they did a lot of the quotes, if that's the Instagram quotes and stuff like
Yeah.
that. A very good friend of mine, Leeanne, Cantelon, took some photos of me, and it just kind of, as we went, I was like, okay, so this maybe should plug and play here. And I never wanted to bring it up too early.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, like, I have a book coming out in 5 years, so I'm going to post 5 times a day about it. And it's like, okay, we get it. Like, you have a book. So, as the lead up happened, I kind of put a little more into it. Was like the climax of the launch, I guess, and then it was everywhere. And I just really spent a lot of time. Actually, the book was meant to come out a year earlier. Not many people know that, but it was meant to come out a year earlier. My publishers made the call. I'm so grateful they did as well. When I moved to LA, they said, hey, we'd like to put this on pause for a year and have you build some relationships, build a platform. And at first I was like, another year, man.
Yeah.
But I'm so grateful they did, because the relationships I was able to form in that year, just being in LA and doing my thing here and having some amazing leaders and people and just influences around me, just really did mean that it was really cool, I guess, the platform that it was able to launch from in a way, as opposed to if it had happened a year before. So I tell people, be very intentional about relationships. Don't abuse relationships. But if you have someone that's an influencer that loves you and believes in you, they want to promote your book. And so I'm never on the end of like wanting to ask people that kind of stuff. I'm always like, let's just be friends. I don't want anything from anyone. But the reality is, I believe in the book, and so I want as many people to be able to read it. And so if you believe in something you're doing, people would jump on board.
Right.
And so I don't know if that answered your question. But,
yeah, it totally did.
But it's fun.
Yeah. I'm so glad I had this opportunity to chat with you. And if people want to find out more about you, Elyse, and your book, what websites can they go to? How can they find you?
Yeah, I blog on my website, Elyse Murphy, ELYSE Murphy.com. And my book is at confessionsofachurchkid.com or Amazon or Barnes & Noble or other places. I think there's a bit of a back order right now for it, which is kind of crazy, but they're restocking, so we'll be back up soon and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, and I'm on like social media, all that kind of stuff. We can be friends and all that stuff.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this. Thank you so much.